The courthouse buzzed with whispers long before the verdict was read. Everyone knew Rebecca had come to win. She sat with perfect posture, her diamond earrings glinting beneath the fluorescent lights, her face painted in victory, even before the judge spoke. David Johnson, however, sat quietly. A tall, broad-shouldered black man in his mid-50s. His suit was clean but worn, the kind that had seen more funerals and Sunday services than business meetings. His face carried years of wisdom, years of building something out of nothing. The gavel came down. The ruling was final. Rebecca would leave with the luxury vehicles, the beach condo, and every cent that sat in their shared accounts. All David was left with was the crumbling family mansion, something the court almost mocked him with, as if it were a burden rather than a gift. Rebecca smirked as she gathered her papers, her manicured hand brushing over David's arm, just to remind him of the power she now held. She leaned toward him, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "Enjoy your broken castle, David. It's all you've got now." Those words weren't just cruel. They dripped with the bitter venom of someone who never respected where he came from, who saw his family's legacy as dirt under her shoes, driving up the gravel road in his old pickup truck. David's heart sank at the sight of the mansion. Once a proud estate, it now looked like a ghost house. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired back. Shutters dangled by rusted hinges, banging against the brick in the evening wind. The lawn was an endless mess of weeds, and vines crawled across the porch as if nature itself wanted to bury the place. David stopped for a moment, just sitting in the truck, staring. To most people, it was worthless. To Rebecca, it had been a joke. But to David, this house was his grandmother's dream. His grandmother, a black woman, who had worked as a maid for white families her whole life, saved every penny to buy this land. She scrubbed floors and washed laundry for others, but every night she whispered, "One day, my children will live free on their own land." And now, here it was, falling apart, yes, but standing. A piece of dignity Rebecca could never truly touch. As David stepped onto the porch, the wood groaned under his weight. The door creaked open, the smell of mold and dust rushing out. It was broken, it was ruined, but in David's eyes, it was still alive. 2 days later, Rebecca returned, her black SUV rolling up the drive like a declaration of victory. She didn't come alone. 3 of her friends were with her, women who loved gossip and cruelty as much as she did. They stepped out of the SUV, heels clicking against the cracked driveway, their laughter carrying through the quiet yard. And there was David, sweat dripping from his brow, his shirt clinging to his back as he hauled out broken furniture from the house. His hands were raw from work, his boots caked in dirt. Rebecca clapped slowly, mockingly. "Well, look at you. King of the castle." Her friends roared with laughter, one even snapping a picture with her phone. David didn't respond. He kept working, refusing to feed their cruelty. But inside, each laugh cut deep. Rebecca's voice rang louder. "Guess this is where you belong. Picking up trash in a place that matches your roots." The racism in her tone wasn't subtle. It was sharp, meant to remind him of where society tried to place men like him. Her friends giggled again, feeding off her venom. David paused for just a second. He tightened his grip on the chair he was carrying, his jaw clenching. But instead of snapping back, he walked past them, placing the chair on the curb without a word. To them, his silence was weakness. But deep down, David knew silence could be power. That night, a storm rolled in. Rain hammered the broken roof, dripping through holes into buckets scattered across the floor. The walls moaned under the weight of wind, and lightning lit up the faded wallpaper in eerie flashes. David sat alone on the staircase, a single lantern flickering beside him. He looked around at the ruin, the peeling paint, the broken banister, the cracked tiles. To anyone else, this was hopeless. To him, it was a test. The storm outside seemed to echo the storm within. Rebecca's laughter haunted his mind. Her friends' whispers replayed over and over. But as thunder roared, something inside David shifted. This mansion wasn't a punishment. It wasn't a joke. It was his inheritance, his history, his fight. And though Rebecca thought she had stripped him of everything, what she really did was hand him back his beginning. While David worked through the night, what Rebecca didn't know was that the mansion wasn't just history. It was hiding something. The land it sat on wasn't ordinary. It was part of an untouched estate his grandmother had once secured, land now being eyed by developers for its prime location. Its value was climbing, quietly, invisibly, waiting for the right time. Rebecca thought she had left him with ruins. In truth, she had unknowingly left him with a fortune in disguise. And soon, the laughter she and her friends enjoyed would come back to choke them in ways they never saw coming. Rebecca believed David had been defeated. She thought the crumbling mansion was proof of his downfall, proof of his shame. But what she didn't realize was that sometimes the ruins people laugh at are the very foundations of a greater rise. David's story wasn't over. It was only beginning. News traveled fast in Maplewood. By the end of the week, half the town already knew about David's fall. The diners buzzed with talk. At the barbershop, men shook their heads. At the corner store, women whispered behind their hands. "Rebecca took it all," one voice murmured. "Left him with that old wreck of a house." Another laughed. "Man went from riches to rags overnight." For some, it was pity. For others, entertainment. Folks always liked a good downfall, and the fact that David was a black man who had climbed high only to crash down, that made the gossip sharper. Some said he'd never recover. Others said he deserved it for marrying Rebecca in the first place, a woman who never respected his background. Everywhere David went, eyes followed him, some with quiet sympathy, others with smug satisfaction. The humiliation wasn't just in Rebecca's laughter. It was in the whispers of a whole town that enjoyed watching a man fall. Back at the mansion, David threw himself into the work. He patched leaks with tarps, hammered loose boards, and cleared debris room by room. One afternoon, while moving a heavy chest from the attic, he noticed something odd. A trap door hidden under old floorboards. It was small, dusty, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. Curious, he pried it open. Beneath, a small storage space held old ledgers, yellowed maps, and brittle documents tied with string. They were his grandmother's papers, records of the land purchase, names of neighbors, and receipts from decades past. At first he brushed it off as sentimental clutter, but as he skimmed through, one detail stood out. His grandmother hadn't just bought the mansion. She had bought hundreds of acres surrounding it, and though most of it had been sold over the years, a portion still legally belonged to him. Land that was now sitting in a prime spot, right where developers were quietly planning a massive project. It was a small detail, but to David, it felt like a spark in the dark. Rebecca, meanwhile, wasn't done humiliating him. She started bringing friends out to see the site. They'd roll up in their polished cars, sipping lattes and laughing as they pointed at the weeds, the cracked shutters, the sagging porch. "David Johnson, millionaire turned groundskeeper," one friend quipped. Another snorted, "Fits him better than the boardroom ever did." Rebecca thrived on it. Every time she saw him covered in sweat and dirt, she felt like she had won again. But what she didn't know was that every insult fueled David's determination. With each cruel word, his silence grew heavier, not out of weakness, but out of focus. He wasn't just fixing a house. He was uncovering his family's legacy piece by piece. Some nights, David sat on the porch, in his old rocking chair, staring at the sky. The stars reminded him of his grandmother, who used to sit with him under the same sky when he was just a boy. She would tell him, "David, they'll laugh at you. They'll try to keep you small, but you remember, roots run deeper than words." Her voice echoed now, decades later. The loneliness weighed heavy. The nights were cold. The work was endless. But the more Rebecca tried to break him, the more David remembered that he came from a line of survivors. His grandmother survived racism, poverty, and humiliation, and still managed to buy this land. If she could build from nothing, then so could he. Weeks passed, and slowly, the mansion began to shift. The roof no longer leaked as badly. The porch looked less like it was falling. The weeds thinned out as David cleared them away. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot. But neighbors who once laughed began to notice. Some drove by slower, surprised at the sight of progress. And behind the scenes, those documents from the attic weighed on David's mind. Could it really be true that he still owned valuable land? Could Rebecca have overlooked the very thing that might change everything? The thought kept him awake at night. Not as a dream, but as a possibility. A seed of hope. But Rebecca wasn't done. One afternoon, she confronted him again. This time, she wasn't laughing. She was cold, serious. Word had reached her that developers were scouting near the mansion's land. She wanted to know more. "Don't tell me you actually think this dump is worth something," she sneered. David stayed silent, his face calm. Rebecca narrowed her eyes. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. What if the joke wasn't on him? What if she had walked away too soon? It wasn't long before the rumors were true. One morning, a convoy of shiny black SUVs rolled up to the property. Out stepped a group of developers in crisp suits and polished shoes. They surveyed the land with professional eyes, jotting notes, snapping pictures, murmuring to one another about prime acreage, expansion projects, and multi-million-dollar opportunities. David stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching them. The mansion behind him was still bruised and battered, but it no longer looked abandoned. When the lead developer approached, he greeted David with respect. "Mr. Johnson, we've reviewed the historical records. This property, it's sitting on gold. And the surrounding land, it's still legally in your name. You own more than you think." David's heart pounded. All those dusty papers from the attic weren't just scraps. They were the key to a fortune Rebecca had completely missed. When Rebecca heard about the developer visit, she lost her composure. Her confidence cracked, and fear slipped through. She stormed to the mansion again, but this time she wasn't laughing. Her voice was sharp, desperate. "You can't handle this, David. You don't know the first thing about business without me. Sign it over. I'll help you manage it." But David didn't budge. He had been silent through her taunts, patient through her cruelty, and strong through her betrayal. Now his silence wasn't weakness, it was power. Rebecca realized too late that in her rush to humiliate him, she had abandoned the very gold mine that could have been hers. Word spread fast in Maplewood. The same diners, barbershops, and corner stores that once whispered about David's downfall now buzzed with a new story. The ruined mansion wasn't a ruin at all. It was the centerpiece of a land deal worth over $150 million. Newspapers ran headlines. Social media lit up. People who once mocked him now called him a visionary. Some even pretended they had believed in him all along. But David knew the truth. They didn't care about him, they cared about his wealth. And that was a lesson he would never forget. Rebecca couldn't stand it. Her arrogance crumbled into rage. At a downtown cafe, she exploded to anyone who would listen. He wouldn't have anything without me. That land should have been mine. But people only shook their heads. They had seen the video clips of her laughing, taunting, parading her cruelty around town. No one had sympathy left. Her friends drifted away. Her invitations dried up. The woman who once held the upper hand now found herself isolated, ridiculed, and forgotten. Meanwhile, David embraced his new chapter. He didn't flaunt the money. Instead, he invested it in restoring the mansion completely, turning it into a community center and heritage site that honored his grandmother's legacy. He funded scholarships for local black students, ensuring no child in Maplewood would feel the sting of poverty and racism the way his grandmother once did. The very land Rebecca mocked became a place of growth, opportunity, and hope. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Rebecca appeared at the mansion gates. She looked smaller now, her expensive clothes doing nothing to hide the desperation in her eyes. She begged, "David, please, I made mistakes. I was wrong. Give me another chance." For a long moment, David studied her. The woman who had once laughed as she stripped him of dignity now stood humbled before him. Finally, he spoke, not with anger, but with calm finality. "Rebecca, I don't hate you, but I'll never let you hurt me again." And with that, he turned away, closing the gate behind him. The mansion glowed with warm lights as voices of children echoed from inside, laughter spilling into the night. David had turned humiliation into triumph, betrayal into legacy. And Rebecca? She faded into the shadows of her own bitterness, a reminder that cruelty always comes back around. Because money can be stolen. Status can be mocked. But dignity, the kind that's rooted deep in resilience and truth, that lasts forever.